But it was a sad time, it was a trying time, and as you may imagine, it was a romantic time that you could lay in bed at night. And I had an Aunt Maud who lived up in Jasper, Georgia. Well, finally, my father, I got a job working with, as I mentioned, I believe earlier maybe, 5 cents an hour, and I put tax stamps on wing cigarettes. Herman Talmadge was the governor of the state of Georgia, and he needed revenues badly, and he put a 1-cent tax on every pack of cigarettes. Well, goodness, cigarettes already cost 10 cents a pack, and you had to pay 11 cents. That's a 10% increase in cigarettes. Well, they put me in this little place at the wholesale grocer there, about 2 blocks from my house, right by the railroad, because everything that Godfrey and Candler sold, canned goods, metal goods, wash tubs, boiling pots, you name it. Oxydol, man, Oxydol was very big. Octagon soap by the carloads came in there. Well, I was in there putting those things. I'll tell you that glue on the back of tax stamps will not give you cancer of the tongue. I'm the living image of that, because it was a rotten sponge in a little round bowl of a thing, and the sponge was older than I was, and I put it, and I couldn't stand the fragrance of that. And so I started, and I'd lick a whole row of 10 and put them on there right quick. But anyway, I saved enough money to buy a ticket that went, it cost me 48 cents, but it was worth it. It took me 107 miles to Jasper, Georgia, and that was my first train. I went to Atlanta. Boy, that was big stuff. I rode the Georgia Railroad all the way to Atlanta. That was 38 miles. And then it was about 88 miles from there to Jasper on the L&N, the Louisville and Nashville. And I'll never forget that. Man, I talked about it in school. They thought I was a big dog to be able to afford that much money to throw away, you know. Because if you traveled in the 32, 33 era, that was throwing it away. But it was worth it. I never dreamed that I'd be with a railroad. In those days, I ended up with I went into banking. And boy, that was out of college, and I got a job, $60 a month. And I had a secretary. Guess what she made? She made $37.50 a month. But I tell you, they had the street railway in Atlanta, and I lived 3 miles from the Trust Company of Georgia, but it was 15 cents for 2 tokens. I walked 3 miles to work, and I walked 3 miles home to save that 15 cents a day. But it went from that. Then went into the railroad, into Macon, Georgia. Macon, Georgia was a center, just as is Spartanburg here, of industry, big manufacturing company, and so many of the paper mills and so forth, located where the railroads were. That's why every town fought to get its share in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. After about 1921, there were basically no more railroads built. There were fights to get to the Pacific Ocean. That was accomplished. The nation was unified by the train. It couldn't be unified when you were only connected by a bunch of horses and mules, could it? But by reason of these steel rails that we see here, it unified this nation. It enabled orderly commerce to go. It also enabled you to travel. I remember riding the train. The first big vacation I ever had in my life was on the train from Atlanta, Georgia to Daytona Beach, Florida. Now, I hear of all those youngsters going down there and carrying on. We went, but we didn't have but 10 cents a day above our hotel room, because the hotel room was $1, and you had to buy your ticket. So we just walked and enjoyed the sun. I hear all these folks diving off the 3rd floor and 5th floor into pools and drinking beer and stuff. We didn't do none of that. We didn't even know what it was, because it must have been 12 or 13 cents for a beer back then, I would guess. I never had it, so I didn't know what it was about. Well, folks think of it as the decline, but actually the railroads are making more money now than they've ever made. People say, oh, the railroads decline. To the average person, they think of the railroad as passenger trains. That was the least. That was a public service. There was no money to be made, and the railroads didn't try to make money off of passengers. It was an accommodation. As a matter of fact, the 10 o'clock train that came to Covington every night wasn't called the Georgia Railroad, it's called the accommodation. It accommodated people who worked in Atlanta and would get home at 10 o'clock at night and leave at 6 o'clock the next morning. At 8 o'clock they'd be at work in Atlanta. It was the accommodation. So people think of the trains as the passenger service. We were just up there at the railroad crossing, and what did we see? We saw a solid train load of containers. Those self-same containers are going to those self-same countries to bring some of those billions of dollars back into this country for our goods. Right here by this track, every night about midnight, there's a trainload of coal that goes down for Jacksonville, Florida, for Miami Beach, all of those places, to make the electricity that they use. Right up there, every other night, the electricity that's running this television station comes through here as a carload of coal from West Virginia and Kentucky mines going to Belmont, North Carolina, which is a source of our basic power right here. That goes on all the time. So the railroads have not declined. They think of it, when I came here, we had 23 freight agents. That was 23 individual taxes to pay on a separate building in every little village up and down here. I had 23 of them in my district. Today, there's not one. They have one that runs, I think it is, from Charlotte, North Carolina, can cover about a 250-mile run and go through the town because of radio, because of the portable telephones and so forth. So the public thinks of the railroads as a decline, but I'll tell you what, I'm not selling any of my stock because it keeps going up every day, every year, every year, every year. We're speaking now about the cotton industry. When the textile mills were brought here, as they were, from New England, you can go up here to Clifton and Converse and see the salt dome roofs. They call them the salt roofs. Well, that was because of snow in New England. That was the only way those folks knew how to build a house, was with a steep, slanted roof like that. You know, a closet back here in the main part of the house up here. So they came down here and thought we'd have that much snow and built their houses accordingly. The people came here and there was great demand for cotton. Spartanburg County was the #2 cotton producing county in the world up until 1928. Now, I doubt if you could find 100 acres of cotton grown in the total in this county, but we shipped it all over the country from Spartanburg. After that, there was a decline, and cotton went to 11 cents a pound. It was of no importance to the people, and so they started growing tobacco, watermelons, cantaloupes, you name it. They grew it. Sweet potatoes became a large item. Therefore, Texas and California on irrigated lands were building the fantastic amounts of cotton, and they came into being, and the trains brought train loads. We had cotton merchants all over this county. We would have thousands and thousands of bales of cotton stored all over Spartanburg County that would be ready to go into all these textile mills. I used to work in the opening room in Porterdale, Georgia, and boy, this nose of mine is so long because I pull the lint out of them. And then I decided I wouldn't work in a textile mill at that time because I would lose my nose. If my daddy owned it, was the way I said it. I wouldn't work in this textile mill if my daddy owned it. Now they have pneumofill machines. They have no more of the lint and so forth. But things change in industry. Artificial fibers. Look at Hearst out here. They're making, and Phillips fibers. So everything changes. We adapt and we prosper. We fight change, we die. That applies to every avenue of life, doesn't it? If we don't enjoy it and enjoy it and enjoy it, then time's going to end on us. Right after World War II was completed, and of course there were thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of soldiers who came and went to Spartanburg during World War I and World War II by way of the railroad. That was one of the things that gained us two important installations of the Army during each of the world wars, and that was because there were trains for transporting them all over the world to and from the West Coast, so right here in Spartanburg, right after World War II, you see, we were at the crossroads this way. Southern went this way. The P&N came up to here. The C&WC came up to here. The clinch field came up to here. And here was Southern right in the middle. And they could not cross private property, folks say. And so they wanted to have this tunnel. So it was fought for 28 years. Folks say, well, why were the folks unreasonable about putting a tunnel? I said, well, if you've got a neighbor that you like on the right of you and a neighbor on the left, and they say, I'm going to build a little tunnel right under your house because we want our children to run back and forth under your house, would you do it? No, you wouldn't. So therefore, it was fought through the courts for 28 years. One time, in the late 50s, I believe it was, our then mayor took a position and said that in the paper that he thought it was ridiculous that one railroad would not allow these others to tunnel under the property of that railroad. So the next day, the president of the Southern Railway, Mr. Dennis William Brosnan, he took a full page in the Washington papers, announced he was closing the Hayne car shop. And that was, at that time, the #1 payroll in Spartanburg County, millions of dollars a year. And it was being reorganized in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the next morning, he had the engineers over. Well, the mayor of that time, the next day, he withdrew and says, no, he thought that we should remain completely undecided about the matter and just let the industries handle their own affairs. And so as a result, the Hayne car shop is still out there. And doubtless there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who were working and weren't looking forward to moving over to Sevier Yard in Knoxville, Tennessee to go to work. But it came that close. All right, then arrangements were made with the other railroads because you see, the Southern Railway was remunerated. It was charged a certain amount per car. A loaded car would move over here to connect with the other railroads. And one empty car was handled free to get back. All right. When they built this tunnel, and then they signed an agreement, and there were changes made, and there were 99-year leases that were canceled in other places, and so the tunnel was built. But what the city hadn't realized was that by putting this tunnel right where it is, forever after, the busiest track in town, which is the one that crosses Magnolia, north, south, east, west of the Southern Railway System, which is now the Norfolk Southern Corporation, is forever frozen at the grade level at which it is now.